English One-on-One. In this video, we will talk about subject-verb agreement. But before we talk about this, let's talk about a sentence. What makes a sentence? Let's look at this example. My daughter is graduating from high school in a few weeks. In this sentence, my daughter is the subject, and is graduating from high school in a few weeks is a predicate. So in order to make a sentence, you must have a subject and a predicate. Now let's look at the predicate closely. It consists of a verb, is graduating, and several prepositional phrases, from high school and in a few weeks. In order to make a simple, complete sentence, all you need is one subject, at least one subject, and at least one verb to make a sentence. So a subject and a verb makes a sentence. For example, he knows, it is raining, we left, students are studying. As you noticed, those sentences do not have any predicates, just a subject and a verb. When we say subject-verb agreement, we talk about how the conjugation of a verb depends on the subject. Not all tenses need a subject-verb agreement. For example, let's look at this column. The simple past. I smiled, he smiled, we smiled. It doesn't matter what our subject is, I or he or we, the verb will always have the ed ending. So there's no subject-verb agreement in simple past. Now, if you look at the simple present, let's see what is happening with the verb smile here. I smile, he smiles, we smile. So we say this verb in the simple present depends on the subject. So if the subject is I or we, you, they, the verb does not take an S. But if the subject is singular, like it, he, or she, the subject takes the ending S. The same in progressive tenses or perfect tenses, in present progressive and past progressive, and in present perfect. For example, I am or I was smiling. He is or he was smiling. We are or we were smiling. So we have to conjugate, we have to change the verb to be depending on the subject. And we say the subject-verb agreement takes place here. Okay, you may say, well, I know these rules. When the subject is singular, obviously the verb takes the singular form. When the subject is plural, the verb takes the plural form. That's true. But it's easier to recognize when the subject is singular, like my daughter. What happens when the subject is compound? Now you have one of my daughters, is it is or are graduating? One of my daughters is or are. Neither of my daughters is or are. So in order to conjugate this verb correctly, in order to follow the subject-verb agreement rules, we're going to study several rules. We're going to look at several types of compound subjects and how those compound subjects affect the verb. Okay, I'm going to start with the basic rule, rule number 1, that you already know. For a singular subject, third person, the verb takes suffix s. For a plural subject, the verb takes no suffix, no s. For example, a book lies on the table, so the subject is singular, no s. It's a zero ending. The verb takes the s, lies. Books lie. Books has the plural suffix s. The verb takes zero ending. Books lie. Now you try. Crocodiles differ from alligators. A crocodile differs from an alligator. Rule number 2 introduces compound subjects and types of compound subjects. So rule number 2 introduces the first type of a compound subject. Remember, only a simple subject dictates the conjugation of a verb. Let's look at this example. The price of those shoes is too high. The compound subject is the price of those shoes. Rule number 2 says, do not let words that come between the simple subject and the verb affect agreement. Remember, a simple subject does not start with the preposition. In our compound subject, we have a prepositional phrase, of those shoes. It starts with the preposition of. So I call this junk. It's prepositional junk. We do not consider this. It's part of the compound subject here. So we eliminate the junk, and what we have left is the simple subject, which is price. Price is a singular word, therefore the verb is going to take the singular form. The verb to be is going to be is. Now you try. In my city, many trees in the park. Now you have many trees in the park. That's your compound subject. And you recognize this junk in the park. So the simple subject is trees. Therefore, are planted by businesses. Rule number 3 is very similar to rule number 2. It talks about adverbial phrases. They are also considered junk and do not let them come between the simple subject and the verb. For example, the teacher as well as the students was working on the problem. The compound subject is the teacher as well as the students. As well as is an adverbial phrase. And if you remember from rule number 2, it's considered junk. So this adverbial phrase, we eliminate this adverbial phrase. It's part of our compound subject. And now the simple subject is the teacher. The teacher is singular. Therefore, the verb we're using here is was. Let's look at some examples of prepositional phrases. As well as, in addition to, together with, along with, except. Now you try. My mother, together with her children, is waiting. The compound subject is my mother, together with the children, is a compound subject. Together with her children is adverbial junk. Therefore, the simple subject is the mother, is. Rule number 4 talks about body, one, and thing words. You are already familiar with these words like everybody, everyone, everything, anybody, anyone, anything, somebody, someone, something, nobody, no one, nothing. They always take a singular form. Therefore, the verb is going to take the S. For example, everybody knows the answer. Nobody speaks German. Somebody was in the room. Now you try. Nobody has helped me since I arrived here. The singular subject is nobody. It ends with body, therefore it's always going to be singular. Okay? Rule number 5 talks about these two specific phrases, neither of and either of. They always take the singular form of the verb. Always. Let's look at this example. Neither of these books is interesting. Neither of these books is our compound subject, and if you remember from rule number 2, you know that of these books is a prepositional phrase. It's junk. We're going to get rid of that. And the simple subject is neither, and it's always going to be singular. Now you try. Neither of his paintings looks. Because neither of his paintings is a compound subject. Of the paintings is junk, and neither is going to be a singular subject. Rule number 6 says, when every and each come before a singular subject joined by and, the verb takes the singular form of the verb. For example, every man and woman has the right to vote. Again, when your subject begins with every, the subject is going to be singular. Therefore, the verb is going to take the S suffix. Now you try. Each student and teacher is aware of the difficulty. Rule number 7 introduces the inverted structure. When the verb comes before the subject, as in there or here sentences, it agrees with the subject that immediately follows the verb. The inverted structure is when the verb comes before the subject, unlike in the regular sentence structure where the verb comes after the subject comes first. For example, there's a tree in the garden. See the verb is, it comes right before the subject tree. Because tree is singular, the verb is going to be also singular. There are many trees. Trees is the plural subject, therefore the verb is are. Now, there is a pine tree and some oaks in the garden. Here you have a compound subject, but the first subject that comes right after the verb is tree, and it's singular, therefore the verb is going to take the singular form. There are some oaks and pine and a pine tree. Oaks is plural, therefore you have the verb are. Now you try. There's always something new to learn in this class. What do you remember about this subject, something? Subjects that end with thing, body, one, they're always going to be singular. So this is your singular subject. Therefore, the verb is going to be is. There is always something new to learn in this class. Number 8 is very similar to rule number 7. We'll continue talking about inverted structures. The inverted structure is also required when a sentence starts with a preposition and where there or here is omitted. For example, on the shelves are a few new textbooks. You notice how the sentence begins with the prepositional phrase, there is not here, and it's followed right with the verb are, and the subject is textbooks. Plural, therefore you have the verb are. Now you can use there in a sentence, but if you want to use the word there, you'll have to put a comma. You have to separate this prepositional phrase from the clause. On the shelves, comma, there are a few new textbooks. Now you try. In the fridge, a dozen of eggs. Now be careful here. The subject is a dozen of eggs here, and it's a compound subject. You have to apply rule number 2. Rule number 2 tells you about prepositional phrases, prepositional junk. You're going to eliminate of eggs, and you have the word dozen. And dozen is a singular word. Even though it means 12, it's a singular noun. It's a dozen, not 2 dozens. So your subject is going to be singular. Therefore, the verb is going to be is. In the fridge is a dozen of eggs. Rule number 9 also talks about the inverted order. When a clause begins with a negative or almost negative adverb such as never, seldom, rarely, little, not only, you must use the inverted structure where the verb comes before the subject. So in a regular sentence, you would say, she never starts her day without a cup of coffee. But if you want to emphasize, you start your sentence with a negative never. And now look what happens here. You use a question order here. Does she start? And notice there's no question mark at the end of the sentence because it's not a question. Let's look at another example. We knew little about inverted sentences. Little did we know about inverted sentences. Now, because the verb knew is in the simple past, we use the auxiliary verb did here. Now you try. He seldom drinks coffee in the morning. Seldom. Now comes the question order. Does he drink coffee in the morning? We're done with the inverted structure for now. And rule number 10 talks about possessive cases. A possessive noun can never be your simple subject. For example, Mary's head has been hurting all day. The compound subject is Mary's head. Mary's is the possessive case. We're going to eliminate that, and we have the word head as our simple subject. Therefore, has been. The verb is going to be with an S. Now you try it. The Smith's house. Okay, so this is your compound subject. Here's your possessive case. You eliminate this, and now you have house as a simple subject. Costs more than ours. The last rule for this video is rule number 11, and it's the easy one. I'm sure you already know about this. Subjects joined by and take the plural form of the verb. And of course, there is an exception. It's rule number 6. For example, my sister and brother. Here's your compound subject, and it's always going to be plural. Therefore, the verb takes no S, live. Or both the teacher and the student were. And the exception is, remember rule number 6, when your subject begins with every or each, it's going to be always singular. So every tree and bush here was planted by my dad.